Hello. Today's topic is development. In the textbook is chapter 10. First, let's define the concept of development. At one point, people think about development in the same way as they think about growth, especially when they talk about economic development. So people think that a development is simply is to have more income, and so they equate development with growth, with economic growth. But over time, people realize that the two concepts actually are very different. Growth is basically is with the more investment, people would have a more income to spend. But development is much a broader concept. It's not only include the improvement in material well-being with higher income, but also it involves improving your social conditions, political conditions. Think about this. When you have higher income, it does not necessarily mean that politically people are more equal. When you have more higher income, it does not necessarily mean that men and women are equal. So development is really a process that not only involve better material well-being with higher income, but also you have a broader improvement in many other areas. Okay, so we know that the development is much a comprehensive, a broader concept than the growth. So here we use these concepts as our uh, working definition of development. So we define development as a continuous process of improving material well-being and social conditions, reducing inequality, and eradicating poverty. So this definition of development includes the concept of economic growth with increasing level of income, but it's much more. It contains additional changes in social and political conditions. It's a very comprehensive, it's multi-dimensional concept. It's much broader than economic growth itself. Now, this map shows how we look at the regions of developed regions and developing regions today. Okay. On this map, we can really see that there are some regions of the world, such as North America, Europe, Japan, and regions such as Australia and New Zealand, they are seen today as developed countries or more developed countries or MDCs. All other regions, such as Latin America, East Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, Southwest Asia, and North Africa, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Russia today was seen as developing countries or less developed countries or LDC. Now we need to look at this map in with some qualifications. We know at one point in history, the Soviet Union, along with some of his Eastern allies, are regarded as developed socialist countries. So today, the Soviet Union no longer exists, and the Soviet Union's Eastern allies also have joined European. Many countries have joined European unions. So their level of development is not as high as developed Western countries and the United States and Canada, but they are not as low as many other developing countries such as sub-Saharan Africa. So even within developing countries, there are some variations. And so we need to look at uh, the position of Russia today with a sense that they are more developed than some other developing countries, while they are not as developed as Western countries, especially with Western European countries and North American countries. So even within developing countries, there are a lot of variations. So these developing countries or developed countries are some very big umbrella words that actually contain a lot of internal variations. Okay. And in the context of talking about development, historically there are also important concepts such as North and the South, and the North and South divide. This concept comes in the 1980s, and somebody drew up this map to divide the entire world into two big blocks. And this red line to the north of this red line, and to a certain extent, also includes Australia, New Zealand. Also, at that time, because South Africa was controlled by the white apartheid regime, so therefore was also placed within the north. So this red line divides the entire world into so-called the north, but not all countries in the north that are actually located in the north. For example, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand are really in the southern hemisphere. So this north and south not entirely geographical, but also is social political as well. So anyway, these countries that are labeled at the north are were regarded as more kind of westernized countries, economically relatively developed, and but also it includes some developed socialist countries as well. Here, the Soviet Union and his eastern allies also plays within this bloc. So therefore, these are a very big complex that involve all countries that are relatively developed, kind of industrialized countries. So you have industrialized Western countries. Also, you have socialist industrialized countries such as the Soviet Union and his eastern allies. So this North was regarded as all countries that are more developed economically, uh, at least at the time of the 1980s. And the rest of the countries are labeled as the South, and these are the countries that are uh, normally today we regard them as developing countries. Okay, compared with the map we saw from the last slide, we see that these maps contain regions that are more consistently uh, 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 go along with what we see as developing countries, such as Latin American countries, countries of Africa, Southwest Asia, South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. In this context, countries in the South do not include the Soviet Union and his eastern allies, and this is consistent with what we saw early on, that the Soviet Union and his Eastern European allies are more of a kind of socialist, more developed socialist countries, and they are more developed than other developing countries. So this is a map that come out during the 1980s, but today the concept of global North and global South are still in use in the literature of development. And that's why we show this map and show its historical context. Also, when you read articles and the books about development, you still see that the North or South or global North and global South, these terms are still in use. Now, how do we measure development? I think development is a multi-dimensional concept. We need many different measures to measure development. But one of the most important measures, or one of the often used measures, related to income. We know income is not only thing that are about the development, but still it is one important component, and therefore we start out by talking about how we use income to measure development. So in this context, we have a very often heard term such as GDP. It's short for gross domestic product. A definition of GDP is the total amount of newly produced goods and services that come from a country within a year. But we do see that people use regional level of GDP or GDP that come quarterly and monthly. But more often, we see that the GDP at the country and at the national level and on a yearly basis. Okay, so that's how we define GDP. Then we also have so-called per capita GDP. It's a measure of standard of living, and that is calculated by using the GDP of a country divided by the total population of the country. So on average, what is the per capita GDP? What is each person on average, how much GDP that they make? That is the concept of per capita GDP. And obviously, since it is a measure of standard of living, the higher the per capita GDP, the higher the standard of living people in the country can enjoy. But we can have some problems in using GDP as a measure of development. First, not every single economic activities in a country is contained within the statistics of GDP. For example, you look at the picture. When you hire people to come in to clean the house, to wash your dishes, you pay them. When you pay them, you will pay by checks, and they would put the checks in the bank, and that would indicate that they have income, and therefore at the end of the year, they report income to the government, and the government would know that these services are generated between individuals. So these service activities were regarded as part of GDP of the country. However, if you hire people to clean your house, to wash dishes by paying them cash, and this cash was not documented in any official accounting, therefore they will not go into a country's GDP account, and therefore that part will not be included within a country's GDP during that year. Also think about that. If you do dishes by yourself, clean houses by yourself, you do not pay yourself, but actually the work actually is done. So you actually did work, but that work was not considered as part of a country's GDP. So that makes the GDP measures a little bit questionable. Yeah. And also we know that many activities are really not officially accounted for. They do not register with the government. They do not pay taxes in order to avoid paying taxes. Also, there are a lot of activities that actually generate income, generate jobs, but they are illegal activities such as drug trafficking. And also in many poor countries, a very large share of economic activities are underground, and they do not have any official license, no official registration, and the countries may not even have that well-developed system and institution to uh, to account for the existence of those economic activities. And farmers grow the crops, and they consume the crops. They can also sell the crops to their neighbors, or they trade the crops with their neighbors in kind. I give you grain, you give me vegetables. So these kind of transitions really did not go into the country's economic accounting. Nobody knows that those activities are existence. Therefore, they are not counted as part of a country's GDP. And some people estimate that less in the less developed countries, up to 40% of economy in on the ground and not registered with the government. Probably the poorer the countries, the larger the share of the economy that was not going to country's GDP. So there's this kind of gray areas in GDP, and that makes it a less reliable measure of development. Even in developed countries, there are also a lot of activities that generate a new value but do not go into GDP. For example, on holiday, you may sell lemonade. You also have Boy Scout cookie sales, Girl Scout cookie sales. These sales, oh, they get in cash, and they do not report how much they have earned to the government. Therefore, these are the activities that, again, are not counted as part of a country's GDP. So that is one problem of using GDP as a measure of development. You really do not have a real number. Second problem of using GDP as a measure of development is that per capita GDP reveals no income, no distribution of income. It is just an average number. When you have a country such as the US, the average GDP may be 50,000 to 60,000 a year. But we know that not everyone is making that kind of money. Some people make a lot more than that, and some people make a lot less. And so that's not the amount of money that the people, everyone in the country actually receive. Look at this chart. This chart shows the distribution of average income growth during American expansions. So this is we look at in historical time during each economic expansion in the United States, where does the actual income has go? So that is the kind of income distribution between the top 10% and the bottom 90%. We look at the first post-war economic expansion from 1949 to 1953. 80% of actual income goes to those at bottom 90%. 20% went to those top 10%. But over the time, this share that went to the bottom 90% had gone down significantly, and at the same time, the share that went to the top 10% increased significantly And in the expansion that run between 2009 to 2012, that 2012 is the latest time when they have these statistics. The share that went to the bottom 90% is negative. And so that you can really see that you have increasing level of income inequality. And so just the average, give you an average income level for the entire country does not tell the whole story. And this chart show a similar story. It's just how the income would divide between the top 1% and bottom 99%. So you can see the similar picture down the early years. The share that went to the bottom 99 was very high, but over time that share had gone down. At the same time, the share of actual income that went to the top 1% increased significantly. Here we have a issue that you guys can consider. Rising income inequality in the United States. What are the problems with rising income inequality in the United States? Is that really a problem? Is that really a problem? Some people think that we need to have some kind of income inequalities so that people who are in a low income ranks would have incentive to work harder to improve their skill, to improve their knowledge, to improve their education, so that they can live a better life. So that a certain amount of income inequality seems to be necessary to give people incentives to improve their life. But this kind of income inequality that we see on this chart, this for the entire country, the share that went down to the bottom 99% is only stay at 5%, but at the same time, the share of actual income that went to the top 1% is 95%. Is that kind of income inequality that we should tolerate? So this is the issue. Okay, is that really a problem? So if you think that it is a problem, should we do something about it? And if we should do something about it, what? So this is a kind of a question that I raise here, and later on you can try to answer this question down the test. We know that those current issues, current discussions, we always use them as a part of a bonus question on the midterm exam or final exam. And the income inequality is not only a phenomenon in the United States. This is a map of Brazil with the different states. You can really see that in Brazil, those coastal states and states with the capital areas seem to enjoy more of a higher income level. At the same time, those states that in the northeast, in Amazon basin, tend to have a lower income level. Okay, and this is a map of China. So very clearly that those provinces along the coastal area seem to enjoy a higher income than those provinces that are in the interior part of China. And this is a map of Mexico, and clearly the states in the tourist region, the Cancun Peninsula, the federal capital region, and those states that are bordered United States enjoy a higher income level than those that are not in those regions. So income inequality is not only a problem in the United States, but it seems to exist in all places. In addition to GDP, there are some other measures of income. And here in this context, we talk about GNP, a gross national product. So if we go back to history to look at economics record uh, down the 1960s, 1970s, the more common measures of total income of a country is GNP. GNP is defined as the total amount of goods and services produced by citizens of a country during a year. And similarly, you could also calculate per capita GNP. So that is the total GNP of a country divided by the total population of the country. Now, the key difference between GNP and GDP can be seen by the key word of citizen. Citizen. Now, citizen, let's first go to look at this map. This map shows the difference between GDP and GNP. See, on this map, we have this indication of you have Mexican-owned enterprises that is located within Mexico. At the same time, you also have Mexican-owned enterprises that are located within the United States. Since both kind of enterprises are owned by the citizens of Mexico, therefore the product that are made by both kind of enterprises are called a part of Mexican GNP because they are produced by the citizens of Mexico. But here, so this is what we call the GNP. But here on this map, we see that within the country of Mexico, there are Mexican-owned enterprises. At the same time, there are also American-owned enterprises. So these enterprises are owned by citizens of different countries, but they are all physically located within Mexico. Therefore, the product that come out from those enterprises are both called Mexican GDP because they are physically located within Mexico. So they are part of a Mexico GDP. So that's the difference between GNP and GDP. Now let's go back to the slides that we saw early on. Here, these slides. Now, the GNP measure used to be very common. It's more common than GDP prior to the globalization. But today, some economic institutions still use GNP as a measure of a country's income. A closest measure to GNP today is from the World Bank's GNI, the gross national income. So gross national income is defined as the GDP adjusted for foreign investment. So there's no need to go into details to look at specifically how they are different from GDP, but we generally can understand that GNI is a measure that is closest to GNP. So World Bank today still use gross national income as a measure of income rather than using GDP. And also, similar to other income measures, we can also use a country's total gross national income divided by the total population of the country to come up with measures such as per capita GNI.